Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. It is very much appreciated. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. But yeah, I tried to make this video especially good. I know that you all like the longer stories, so for this one we have 4 decently long stories, right around 30 minutes on average. Anyways, sit back, relax, grab a coffee, pack a bowl, whatever it is that you do to relax. I don't judge. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. 3 years after graduating college, I decided I needed a break from the corporate grind. The 45-minute commute, early mornings at the office, and late nights on the computer took their toll on my physical and mental health. This amount of stress culminated in me waking up one night with chest pains and feeling short of breath. Convinced I was having a heart attack, I called 911 and was transported to the ER. A few hundred in medical bills later, I was diagnosed with panic disorder. Although my mental health had never been perfect, I had never experienced anything this intense and was shocked stress could have this much of a physical effect. Against the advice of my parents, former academic advisor, and colleagues, I quit my first grown-up job less than 2 years in. Luckily, I'd always been somewhat of a saver and had worked my way through college, so I had some time to figure things out before the bills would start piling up. I found a much closer job at a small bar and grill called Al's. It was in a pretty remote location, but was often pretty busy since it was the only restaurant and bar in the village. The atmosphere at the restaurant was like night and day compared to my office job. I could wear a t-shirt and jeans. Start time was never earlier than 10 a.m., and my coworkers felt like friends rather than competition. I loved working there, and still look back on the 2 years I spent there fondly, despite what happened. It was a Friday night, and we were preparing to close at midnight. Sometimes we stayed open later, but the last few bar guests cleared out early that night. Jean, a server in her early 20s, sat at the counter counting her tips while Ben and I restocked the bar and washed the last few beer glasses. "Better hurry up before that fog spreads," Jean said in a joking voice. "You know I'm staying across the street tonight," Ben responded, sounding annoyed. Ben's parents lived just down the street from the restaurant, and he would sometimes stay there if he was too tired or too intoxicated to drive home from the late shifts. I glanced outside. It didn't look too bad in the village, but out towards the main road leading back to where I lived, the fog was so thick the road disappeared. "Driving through that's gonna be really bad," I said, shaking my head. Suddenly, Ben and Jean looked up from what they were doing. They exchanged tense-looking glances. "Where do you live?" asked Jean. "Warlington," I answered. Jean looked pale. "You realize you can't drive all the way back tonight, right?" she asked. "They should have let you go earlier before it got bad." "I mean, I have to," I said, confused. "Where else would I stay?" "You don't know anyone in town?" Jean asked. I shook my head. "Then you can stay with me if you need to. You can crash on the couch, just don't go out in the fog at night, especially on 23. It's dangerous. There's so many accidents already with normal visibility. Imagine how dangerous it is when you can't see 10 feet in front of you." She wasn't wrong. 23 was notorious for deadly accidents, being a rural yet busy 2-lane highway with a ton of sharp turns. I'd had a few close calls driving to and from Al's already. I was still shocked she offered to let me stay at her place. We were friendly, but she'd never given any indication she was interested in anything more. But her offering to let me stay over to avoid some minor driving conditions seemed extreme. Wasn't like it was a snowstorm. I agreed to stay the night both for reasons of safety and being curious to see if she did see me as more than a friend. I had to help Ben put away a few things in the walk-in, so Jean said I could meet her outside and follow her to the apartment when I was done. Hey, do you think Jean's into me or something? I asked Ben once we were done. I'm surprised she actually invited me to stay over. Ben shrugged. Maybe, he said. Ben wasn't his usual self tonight. He was usually outgoing and boisterous. On the slower weekend nights, he was known to sneak some drinks back to the break room, but tonight he had been fairly quiet and remained completely sober. We got our closing tasks completed for the night, and I was getting ready to walk out the door when Ben stopped me. Hey man, seriously, don't drive in that fog tonight. I don't care what happens at Jean's, just wait until morning to head back. This was out of character for Ben. He didn't have a reputation of being a safe driver. He regularly drove under the influence and wasn't opposed to street racing. I wanted to know why this was such a big deal to him, but was exhausted and knew Jean was outside waiting for me. I nodded. No worries, I'll see you tomorrow, I said, waving to Ben. It was less than a 5-minute drive to Jean's apartment. She lived in an older duplex. She grabbed some blankets and a pillow from the closet and put them on the couch for me. I thanked her. I felt pretty awkward at this point. It felt strange spending the night at her apartment when we only ever saw each other at work or the occasional bonfire or party. Luckily, Jean broke the ice by putting on a Marvel movie. We were both fans of the Marvel Universe. We watched a few movies, smoked, and ate some snacks. It was starting to be clear to me that she didn't have any interest in me romantically, but I was okay with that. She was still a good friend, and I really enjoyed her company. After a while, my mind drifted back to Ben's strange demeanor tonight. Did you notice how Ben was tonight? He was quiet and didn't have a single beer. Yeah, don't worry about it. He always gets like that when it's foggy out. He doesn't like to talk about it, but he saw a bad accident out there a few years ago when there was fog and it was hard to see. He wouldn't tell me much about it, but it must have been pretty gory. I nodded. That made sense. Jean decided to head to bed after the movie was over, and I got settled in on the couch. I was just starting to doze off when my phone rang. I jumped up and quickly silenced it. It was my roommate, David. I figured whatever he was calling about could wait until morning and tried to go back to sleep. Then I saw a text. Call me now. It read in all caps. Annoyed, I got up and stepped out onto the porch to avoid waking Jean up. I called David back. What's so important you need to call me at 2 a.m.? I asked. Our house got broken into, responded David. Are you kidding me? I asked. No, I just called the police and they're on their way. I just got home from Jenny's and it looks like the back door was kicked in. The lock's broke, the place is totally ransacked, and our TV's gone. What about my Xbox? I asked nervously. Sorry, man, I don't see it here, David responded. I'm on my way, I said and quickly hung up. I quickly gathered up my things and folded up the blanket. I decided to leave quietly and text Jean in the morning to let her know what happened. I didn't see the point in waking her up, and I wasn't in the mood to be talked out of going to see what all had been stolen. I was getting angrier by the second. I hated how rampant theft was in Warlington, and was even angrier remembering how many hours I spent at a job that almost killed me to earn everything I owned. I texted David to let him know I may take longer than usual to get home, since I would have to go slow to get through the fog on 23. Once I got onto the highway and realized how thick the fog was, my rage subsided a bit. I knew I'd have to stay fully focused on driving. I was pretty tired, so I turned on the radio to help me stay alert. I drove 25 despite the 55 mile per hour speed limit. I couldn't see anything. The fog was the worst I'd ever seen, even worse than snow blindness. Almost every station on the radio was breaking up. The only station I could get a signal on was from some folky-sounding country station. I eventually gave up and turned it off, annoyed. I started to see some light through the fog, so I slowed down a bit. I quickly realized there was a pickup truck on the side of the road with the hazard lights on. I slowed to a stop behind it and got out. There was a man who looked like he was in his 50s sitting in the driver's seat with the door open. He was mumbling and crying, head in his hands. Sir? Are you okay?" I asked. He continued to mumble and sob at the same time. "Do you need help? I can call someone," I said. He looked up, appearing very distressed, and his face was very red. "The phones don't work out here. We're screwed. We're dead," he said as he began to hyperventilate. "What's going on? I can help you." I tried. "They messed with my truck. I looked away for 1 minute and my truck won't start," he stammered. "Look, man, it's okay. I'll call a tow truck for you and the police if you need me to. It'll be fine." He continued to sob and hyperventilate while I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. I tried 3 times and the call wouldn't go through because of bad service. I knew this area didn't have the best reception, so I told him I was going to walk up the road a ways to try to get service. It's no use, he kept repeating. I started to feel like I was a little out of my element. I didn't know how to calm down someone who was hysterical and had no idea how his truck was damaged since it looked fine from the outside. If someone really did mess with his truck, were they still out here? I walked about 50 feet away from where we were parked and again tried to call 911. Still no service. I cursed Verizon's coverage and walked back to the man in the truck. "Hey, I'm not having any luck right here, but if you want to come up with me to the gas station, we can call for help from there." "No," he snarled. "You're one of them." He began mumbling things under his breath that didn't make sense. "I've been out here for 6 hours. Nothing's real. The road should have ended miles ago." I started to fear this may be a mental health issue rather than a car issue. "It's okay. You're safe now. I can take you up the road and everything will be fine." The man didn't take this well and began fumbling around for something in the glove compartment. To my horror, he pulled out a shotgun. I stepped back. "I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to hurt you. It's fine, I'll go." He continued to point it at me until I was out of sight. I ran to my car, slammed the door, and peeled out of there. My heart was beating into my chest while I sped over the foggy road. When I couldn't see the truck headlights anymore, I slowed down knowing I couldn't keep going this fast. I had trouble regulating my breathing, so I dug into my bag, trying to retrieve my anti-anxiety meds. I decided I was probably far enough away to pull over, so I did, and was luckily able to take my meds. I was sitting there trying to get my bearings when my phone rang. I quickly picked it up, happy to finally have service. It was Jean. "Where are you?" she asked. I could hear the concern in her voice and began to feel guilty. "I had to drive home. I'm sorry. It was an emergency," I explained. "Where are you now?" she asked. "I'm still on 23, about halfway to Warlington. I'm pulled over. I just had some weird stuff happen and it scared the heck out of me." "You can't be alone out there like that, Owen. It's really dangerous in ways you don't understand. I'm coming to get you." "No, Jean, there's no reason for you to risk driving all the way out here. I just saw some paranoid dude and it freaked me out. It's not a big deal." I realized she hung up and tried to call her back. The call would not go through no matter where I moved my phone. I yelled, slamming my hands on the steering wheel. I didn't feel like I could leave because she knew where I was and was coming out here, but I also didn't want to sit parked on the side of a dangerous highway in the middle of fog. After about 10 minutes, I walked out into the woods to pee and try to get better cell reception. As I was heading back to the car, I saw a faint light in the woods. I squinted and was able to see the silhouette of a person holding a lantern. The person looked heavy and somewhat tall, kind of like the man in the truck. I didn't want to stick around to see if it was him, so I booked it back to my car. The fog was thick in the woods as well, and it made it hard to see around the many trees. All of a sudden, I ran into something. It knocked the wind out of me and bloodied my nose. I jumped back, then looked up. "Owen?" said Jean. "Jean, are you okay?" "Yeah, but walk much?" she joked. "You shouldn't have come out here. It's impossible to see, and there's some delusional dude out here with a gun." "I didn't want to leave you out here alone. We need to go before the fog gets worse," she said, following me back to the car. I didn't see how it was possible for the fog to get any worse. I'd driven in fog many times over the years and had never seen anything like this. It was like trying to see through milk. "Do you want me to drive?" asked Jean. "I've seen this before and I think I can do it." I nodded. It felt weird having her drive my car, but I was pretty shook up and she sounded confident. We continued on, albeit at a faster speed than I was comfortable with. I did suggest she slow down a few times and she would initially agree, but would quickly come back up to speed. I had no idea how she was able to see the road, let alone any other cars. Not that there were any on the road. I tried to make conversation, but she was quieter than usual. She seemed tense. I decided it was probably best not to distract her. I eventually felt so uncomfortable with her speed that I asked if she could stop at the quick stop gas station that was a few miles before the exit to Warlington. It had to be coming up. She agreed to. By the time we reached Quick Stop, I was shaking with fear. Jean said she was going to stay in the car, so I went in alone. I locked myself in the bathroom and splashed some cold water on my face. My phone rang. It was Jean. "Hey," I answered. "Where are you? I've been on 23 for like 10 minutes and haven't seen you." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "You're outside Quick Stop waiting for me," I stammered. "Stop messing with me, Jean. It's been a weird night." "Owen, listen to me. Whatever's at Quick Stop with you, that's not me. I should have told you how serious this was before you left. Something paranormal that no one understands happens when the fog covers 23. It happened to my grandpa years ago. He was always really paranoid about fog, but never told anyone why. When he was in his twilight years, he told me more about what he saw out there. They can manipulate you and distort your perception. You don't have much time. They know you're out there." "Okay," I stammered. I struggled to compose myself, breaking into a cold sweat. Jean's odd demeanor in the car began to make sense. "Listen to me. Find something to use as a weapon and don't let them know you're on to them until you're ready." I was frantically trying to ask what they were when the call cut out. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. "Owen, are you okay?" I heard Jean's voice. I knew I needed to buy some time. I tried to sound as normal as possible. "I'll be out in a second." "Hey, can you go look in the car and see if I have a lighter?" "Yeah, just try to hurry up so we can get out of here," she answered. I heard her walk away, and when I heard the ding of the front door close, I quietly slipped out of the bathroom. I walked around the store looking for something, anything to use as a weapon. There was no one else at the store besides it being open 24/7, not even a cashier. Unfortunately for me, This wasn't one of those shady gas stations that sold brass knuckles and pocket knives. I glanced outside and noticed whatever was posing as Jean was standing off to the side of my car. If I could get in the car before her, I could take off. Seeing few other options, I made a break for it. The being posing as Jean must have picked up on my determination as she frantically tried to get back in the car. She was halfway in when I shoved her out as she screamed. Next thing I knew, she was in front of the car, and before I could hit my brakes, I felt the thrust of my car hitting something. I quickly threw my car in reverse and took off. I knew I had to get out of here. I sped up despite having no visibility. I called Jean back, and on the third try, the call finally went through. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yeah, but what's happening?" I yelled. "It's too much to explain right now. Just focus on getting out. If you're past Quick Stop, it shouldn't be much longer. Just don't trust any interaction you have on 23 tonight. They're out." "Who's they?" I demanded. "No one knows what they're called. They can shape-shift and distort things. Just get off the road as soon as you can." I continued driving at a slow but steady pace and was hopeful I would start to see the lights of Warlington ahead. However, to my horror, I noticed two blinking lights just feet away from me. I swerved to avoid hitting the car. A man ran up beside me and started to pound on my window. It was the guy from earlier in the truck. I wasn't sure if he was a regular guy or one of them, but I didn't want to take any chances. I tried to speed up to get around him, but the loose gravel slowed me down. "Please, man, I'm sorry about earlier. I have a wife and 2 kids at home. I need to get out of here. Please help." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door, and he got in. I wasn't sure why I took this risk, besides the fact that he did try to warn me earlier. That, and he has a gun that may be needed at some point. "Where's the gun?" I asked. He sat it on the middle seat. "It'll stay right there. I won't touch it," he promised. I took off, unsure if I made the right decision. I learned that the guy's name was Josh and that he lived on the other side of Warlington. He seemed like a very normal guy, and I began to feel more at ease as the drive continued. "What brought you to 23 tonight?" I asked casually. He chuckled and looked out the window. This seemed strange, and I suddenly had a bad feeling. I kept a close eye on him. He glanced over, and I caught a look into his eyes. They were gray with no visible pupil. I remembered him having brown eyes when I saw him by his truck. This wasn't him. I slammed on the brakes, and at the same time we both reached for the gun. He lunged at me in an attempt to grab it out of my hands. We struggled for a moment over the gun. I was able to grab it and pulled the trigger as he lunged at me. The shot made my ears ring. I began to panic as I had to pull him out of the car, then I tossed the gun into the woods. Luckily, my car wasn't hit by the bullet since his window was open. I was shaking, speeding off into the night. I felt like I'd been on this road for hours. I tried to call Jean several more times. The call dropped a few times, then rang. "Are you okay?" I asked frantically. "Yeah, I had to turn around. It was getting too dangerous. I'm sorry I couldn't help," Jean said through tears. "It's okay. Another one tried to get me, but I'm almost out," I told her. We stayed on the phone until Jean arrived home safely. Our connection was beginning to cut out again, so I let her know I would let her know when I got home. It felt like a miracle when I began to see the lights of Warlington. The fog rapidly thinned out as I turned off of 23. Breathing a sigh of relief, I sped home, still shaking and sweating. When I arrived home, David greeted me. "What did the police say?" I asked, trying to sound as normal as possible. At this point, a break-in was the least of my worries. An expression of genuine confusion crossed David's face. "What?" he asked. "Police?" I glanced around the living room, nothing looking out of place, and nothing was missing. That said, I knew it wasn't in my best interest to sound crazy. Did you hear about any break-ins around here? Someone at work said there was one in Warlington tonight. I improvised. David looked confused. No, I haven't heard anything. I went to bed and tried to get some sleep. I had no idea what happened, but assumed I'd gotten through the worst of it. One thing I was certain of is that I would never drive on 23 in the fog again. I woke up early the next morning and quickly got ready for work. When I realized this would involve going on 23, I hesitated. I stepped outside and the sky was crystal clear. I looked on Google Maps to see if there was another way to Al's. There were some back roads I could take, but it would take almost twice as long. I decided to bite the bullet and go. I took my meds and left. Everything looked normal. The radio also worked better this time, and the music helped me stay calm. Eventually I began to relax. I remembered I was almost out of gas, so I went to turn into Quick Stop and had to slam on the brakes when I noticed the yellow tape and multiple police cars. I cautiously pulled around to drive away when I noticed Ben and several other people from the village standing at the edge of the tape. I parked my car across the street and walked over. Ben, what's going on? I asked. Ben turned around and I was shocked to see he was crying. He shook his head. Jean was hit. Whoever did it took off. Didn't even call for help. Some guy from Warlington got shot further up the road, too. I think he worked at the hardware store in the village. I started shaking. Where's Jean now? I asked even though I already knew. She's gone. I'm sorry, Ben said. I began hyperventilating. I stepped away and ran back to my truck. I shut myself in, slamming my fists into the steering wheel and wailing. Ben walked over and was trying to calm me down, but I was inconsolable. I'll never get over it. I was never convicted or even questioned because the security footage at Quick Stop wasn't working the night of the fog. I later checked my call records, and there was only one call from her that night. The first one she made to me to tell me she was coming to find me. There was no record of the call from David. I quit Al's, broke my lease, and was moved out of state by the end of the week. I can't shake the guilt I feel daily, and I'll never forget how Jean tried so hard to keep me out of the fog. I'll never drive in fog again. I guess you can say I was unlucky, and was dealt an awful hand in life. When I was younger, I lost my father to a car accident. He was coming home from a long shift one night. Some guy decided that it would be a good idea to drink and drive going over the recommended limit, and I'm sure you can put two and two together. It completely devastated my mother. Not only did she lose the love of her life, she was struggling financially with a child to take care of. We couldn't afford to get him a proper burial, and it broke my mother that she had to deal with going through this by herself. My mother didn't have any family that she talked to. If I could remember correctly, it was only ever my father, my mother, and myself. No aunts, no uncles, not even any grandparents. My mother cried many nights as she could barely provide for us. She made many sacrifices to make sure I had somewhat decent clothes on my back. As the years passed, my mother had worked long hours on many jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. I even picked up some part-time jobs to help out with the bills against my mother's wishes. Even with us picking up extra jobs, it wasn't enough to keep our house. We had to move in a crappy apartment complex on the worst part of town. I even offered to drop out of school to pick up more jobs to help out with rent. My mother never agreed with the idea. Carmen, your best gift in this world is your intelligence. Don't throw away your gift just for me. She could always tell me. It kinda became her own quote. She never liked the thought of me working the jobs at all. She always wanted me to focus on school, but I couldn't. It never felt right making her go through so much while I sat back. Unfortunately, my mother fell extremely ill. All those years she overworked herself took its toll on her health, and it eventually caught up to her. I tried everything in my power to help pay for her medical bills. I picked up more side jobs, near working myself to exhaustion. But no matter how hard I tried, or how many jobs I picked up, it was nowhere close to paying the fees. But my mother unfortunately passed away. I was working a shift at a local gas station when I was given the news. I couldn't remember that night well. All I could remember was me bawling my eyes out all night. I was devastated. I didn't even get to tell my mom goodbye. I was alone. No one to look out for me but myself. I never got to say goodbye to the person who overworked themselves just to provide for me. It was hard for me to adjust after that. Felt like I lost a part of me, along with my mother, but I had to continue working my jobs for crappy pay. A barely 18-year-old girl working multiple jobs for crappy pay, just to keep a crappy apartment. I would be lying if I didn't say I lost all motivation for living. I would be lying if I said I had faith in myself. Faith never existed in the real world. But I managed this far. So I guess that stands for something. Crappy pay wasn't my only issue. The landlord always had something against me and my mother. She purposely tried raising the rent multiple times since we moved in. She knew we had it rough, but she didn't care. In her words, trash like us didn't deserve to live in her precious apartments. While I was coming back home from an exhausting day of working jobs, she was standing in front of my apartment door with her arms folded. She wasn't pleased. Her face twisted into a small frown. Her partially gray hair braided into a dingy ponytail. "Rent's due today, Mr. Harris," she said while tapping her foot against the floor, awaiting for me to answer. She always had a negative aura that centered around her. I always sensed she was sent by the devil himself to torment me further. But I paid you the money last week," I responded. I felt my heart start beating a bit faster. I felt as if this was another attempt to get me kicked out again. You can never be too sure with her at this point. "Do not lie to me, Miss Harris. You never paid me the money for rent. I don't like being lied to." Her frown then turned into a small grin. She knew I wouldn't be able to give her more money than what I already gave her. "Please, Miss Yolanda, don't do this. I'll pay you double the rent. I'll find a way," I pleaded. She looked at me with her cold, dead blue eyes, her grin growing more sinister, as if she liked hearing me plead and beg her. "How are you supposed to pay me double the rent if you can't even afford to bury your mother?" She finally responded while her grin only got bigger. I felt my lips quiver as the tears started rolling down my cheek. I felt like a small child compared to her. I felt shattered and destroyed by her comments. How could a person say something like that unprovoked? I stood there and sobbed. I was going to get kicked out of the only place I had to call home now, and there was nothing I could do. I was completely at her mercy. It was established she had none. I could feel her heartless stare gaze upon me as I continued to sob. I could even hear her giggle slightly. She was enjoying this. She enjoyed seeing me suffer. "Well then, Miss Harris, it hasn't been fun having you in my apartment at all, so I would..." Before she could finish her sentence, the sound of a door swinging open caught her attention. An older gentleman with slightly gray hair and a pair of old blue overalls stepped out of his apartment. "Now you leave that poor girl alone. You want rent? Here, take this." he said while pulling out cash from out of his wallet. He shoved a couple of crumpled up $100 bills into Miss Yolanda's arms. Her grin slowly faded away as a look of annoyance took its place. "This isn't your business, Terrence. This girl can barely pay rent. She's a nuisance and deserves to be kicked out," she mumbled as she stared daggers at me. I couldn't find the strength to form any words to defend myself. I barely found the strength to fight the urge to break down again. "Just take the money and crawl back to whatever hole you've come from," he stated as he gave her a look of disgust. Miss Yolanda slowly started counting the crumpled up hundreds. She let out a groan as she pocketed the money. "You got lucky this time, but he won't be able to bail you out the next time," Miss Yolanda growled before walking down the hallway. I felt myself able to think clearly again as her negative aura was gone again, but I couldn't help but to continue to sob. "Are you alright, kid?" he asked. His voice was sympathetic as he knelt down beside me. I caught a small glimpse of his face before I looked away in shame. His face had a sympathetic expression on it. I'm alright. You didn't have to do that for me," I muttered, as I began wiping the tears away from my eyes. He paused for a moment before responding. "You didn't deserve to go through that. I know you're a hard worker and it's hard to meet ends meet. I was once in your shoes when I was younger," he said while reaching his hand out toward me. His voice was soft and sympathetic. "I try my best, but no matter how hard I try, I can't find a stable job that would hire me. So I work different low-wage side jobs that barely pay," I said while sniffling. I felt the tears flooding my eyes again. I reached out for his hand, and he helped me to my feet. "I'm Terrence. It's nice to meet you," he said while waiting for me to respond. "Carmen. And thank you again, Mr. Terrence, for what you did for me," I mumbled while wiping my eyes again before the tears could form. "I really appreciate what you did for me, but I have to get ready for my night shift in an hour," I said while I searched my purse for my apartment keys. "Wait, it's almost 1:45. It's not safe for you to go out there, especially with all the women that's been going missing recently." His voice had a sense of worry in it as he stared at me with a concerned look. "I have to. I can't just not go to my shift, and plus I need the money. I can't afford to be kicked out," I said while pulling my apartment keys out my purse and into the small keyhole. "Wait, I could get you another job that pays you well." His expression was sincere. I turned around toward him and gave him a raised brow. I hope he wasn't implying what I think he was. No, I don't mean that kind of job, if that's what you were thinking." He nervously chuckled. "My friends and I work as cleaners for a cleaning company ran by a businessman named Michael Hendricks, and he can use another employee." He paused before continuing. "But the pay is really good, so you don't have to worry about working multiple jobs," he added. His demeanor changed, like he wasn't telling me something. I caught on to his sudden change of movements, but I couldn't refuse it. This was a rare opportunity, and I needed it. "I'm actually heading in to help with some cleaning tomorrow around 7. If you want, I could take you with me, and you can start tomorrow." His demeanor switched back to sympathetic as he asked, waiting for my response. I felt myself tearing up again. Not only that he saved me from being kicked out, he helped me land a possible job. "Thank you so much. I'm truly grateful." I tried not to tear up again, but this was a very emotional night for me. "Don't worry about it. Just try and rest for the night. You'll need it." His voice was soft and sympathetic. I would be lying if I said that he didn't make me feel a bit better about life in itself. He stood outside his apartment door and watched over me, making sure I got in my room safely. Once I got inside my crappy apartment, I slopped down onto my pull-out mattress and laid there in the dark. alone in the dark with only my thoughts to keep me company. Mr. Terrence's words stuck with me, even after our interaction was over. He wasn't lying. Younger women were going missing in our area. A girl around my age went missing a couple days ago. I remembered seeing posters of her around the areas I worked. Her bright blonde hair and her ocean blue eyes were very noticeable. Her smile looked like it could brighten anyone's day who came in contact with her. I felt sorry for the families of the victims who went missing. God only knew what pain they were going through. Having a family member go missing must be difficult to deal with. It's not like the police did anything to help find them. The media tried to get them to at least investigate, but nothing ever came of it. Local search parties were formed, but it was always the same results. Nothing. All the young women had a couple of things in common, but the main common similarity they shared was they were in the escort business, to put it lightly. I drifted in and out of sleep. I haven't tried fighting sleep. Morning came quick as I was awakened by an alarm. The alarm on my phone blaring a loud noise that was sure to wake me up from my slumber. I took my time getting ready. I always get an hour head start on anything. Working a lot does that to you over time. The atmosphere was cold and uneasy. It was always cold, but this feeling of uneasiness was stronger. But I couldn't focus on it now. Once I got finished getting ready, I took a look around my apartment and sighed. Hopefully this could be my chance to change my life around. Exiting my apartment, Mr. Terrence was already standing in the hallway with his hands typing away at his phone. Once he looked up at me, he nearly dropped his phone, almost as if I caught him by surprise. He stood there nervously staring at me before finally speaking up. "Glad I didn't have to knock to wake you up," he said while nervously chuckling at himself to recover. "Yeah, I didn't want to keep you waiting for me, so I decided to wake up early." I responded while looking him up and down with a slightly raised brow. "Well, we should get going now, shouldn't we?" he asked while motioning for the exit. His voice sounded a little shaky, like he was trying desperately to find something. We exited the apartment building and walked toward the parking lot. Mr. Terrence pointed toward a beat-up 2004 Lincoln parked in the lot. The drive was long and for the most part quiet. Small talk was made every once in a while, but it was mainly his text notifications going off. "If you don't mind me asking," he paused for a moment, breaking eye contact with the road and quickly looked up over at me. "Do you have any other family members that could have took you in?" His voice was filled with sympathy and remorse. I took a moment to respond, looking down at my hands as they fidgeted around in my lap. "No. It was only me and my mother after I lost my father. Now it's just me," I responded while looking out the car window. Fighting the urges to tear up, I continued watching the cars go past us. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked, but I want to say that you're a strong young lady that will one day be a great member of society," he said. His voice had a slight hint of confidence. The remainder of the drive was silence, but Mr. Terrence's phone kept beeping, but I just ignored it. We eventually got to the address, and what greeted us was a run-down warehouse, its yellow coating of paint nearly peeled completely off. Vines were growing on the sides of the building while the grass and gravel were mixed up together. Two men stood beside a limo, having a conversation with one another. One of the men's eyes glanced at us while Mr. Terrence parked the car. Once Mr. Terrence and I stepped out the car and made our way to the others, a young woman with brunette hair stepped out of the limo and quickly made her way toward the other side, opening the car door. A man with blonde hair and a very expensive-looking suit stepped out. The two men who were talking immediately stopped and turned their attention to the man in the suit. "Listen and listen carefully. I need the insides of the building cleaned." He stopped speaking as his attention was focused on me now. "Who's the kid?" he asked while raising his brow in confusion, his gaze never leaving me. Mr. Terrence quickly spoke up in my defense. Mr. Hendricks, this is the girl I was telling you about. She was looking to work with us and make a little money to get on her feet," he said while stammering. Mr. Hendricks' confused look slowly turned to a grin before he leaned closer to Mr. Terrence, whispering in his ear. Mr. Terrence's face had a look of disappointment for a brief moment before Mr. Hendricks patted him on his back before stepping back into his limo. "Get the inside cleaned up. And Terrence, get that issue resolved before I get back. Understand?" he said while waiting for his response. Mr. Terrence nodded his head slowly before taking a deep breath. The limo sped off, leaving a small cloud of dust behind in its place. "Let me introduce you to the rest of the crew." Mr. Terrence motioned over toward the two men now putting on equipment. "Carmen, this is Sanjay, and Luther," he explained as both men extended their hands out for a shake. "It's nice to meet you, Carmen," they both said in unison. "It's nice to meet you both," I responded, accepting their handshakes. "How long do you think until it happens again, Terrence?" Sanjay asked while shooting a look at Terrence. "Hopefully not soon," Terrence said while letting out another sigh of disbelief. "Let's just hurry this up so we won't have to resort to it." Luther spoke up while tossing me a pair of gloves. "Sorry, we didn't expect a girl to be working with us. The only spare suit we have is way too big for you." He spoke. His tone was apologetic and remorseful. "It's just fine. As long as the job gets done, I don't mind getting dirty," I said while slipping the latex gloves on my hands. We approached the entrance of the warehouse and took a step into the building. A foul smell immediately hit my nostrils like a ton of bricks, making me gag a bit. Almost like something died in here in the warehouse. I took a look around the dimly lit warehouse. The only main source of light was that of the sun. I felt the same uneasy feeling I felt back in my apartment, but this time it was more intense. My body didn't feel right. My instincts were telling me something wasn't right. The smell only got worse as we stood in the warehouse, making my stomach turn in disgust. "Smells like something died in here," I said aloud while making my way over the small pile of rotting wood. "Probably some small animal that got stuck in here and died," Sanjay replied quickly, his voice filled with some worry. While I continued walking, the smell got stronger in a certain direction. But before I could move toward the direction, Mr. Terrence grabbed my shoulder, stopping me in my tracks. "Don't go wandering around now. Me and the fellas are going to grab some more equipment from the truck. Just stay put, for your safety," he said. His voice was commanding as he waited for my response. I hesitated for a moment. What does he mean, for my safety? But I nodded my head, assuring him I would follow his instructions. Once they exited the warehouse, I took a look around the big empty building. The old white paint nearly peeled off the walls, exposing the bricks. My nose burned with the unbearable foul smell plaguing my nose. I had to find the source of the smell. It was driving me crazy and I couldn't take it anymore. Mindlessly walking around the warehouse, the smell only got stronger as I walked. My stomach continued turning and my heart pounding as my nose led me to a huge silver door. The smell was overwhelmingly strong. It smelled like death itself, if you can describe it like that. Without thinking, I slowly began reaching my trembling hand out toward the door handle to open the silver door. My mind wanted to run far away from here, but my body wanted to know what the source of the smell was. Gripping the door handle, I twisted the handle and pulled the door open with little strength I could muster. A mixture of feelings hit me. The smell was completely overwhelming my nostrils, and I felt my heart drop to my stomach. Behind the door was a room with human skulls across the floor. Some still had flesh on them, while others looked like they were destroyed. A skull in particular stood out to me the most, however. A good chunk of bright blonde hair still remained intact, and also to my horror, one ocean blue eyeball remained in the eye socket. My knees felt weak, and they struggled to keep me up and from falling. This was what happened to all the missing women. Before I could process it any further, a firm hand covered my mouth and I was pulled back by a strong force. I specifically said to stay put and not wander away this place. Mr. Terrence's voice roared with anger as Sanjay and Luther stepped in front of me with disgusted expressions on their faces. She saw too much already. Might as well take care of that issue Mr. Hendricks wanted taken care of. Luther muttered as he swung the silver door back open. My eyes widened in horror as the tears began flowing down my face. It was clear that I was the issue their boss was referring to. He knew I would most likely stumble across the door. Mr. Terrence began forcing me into the room, while Sanjay assisted him by picking up my legs, carrying me into the room. I tried to struggle, but I was no match against their strength. The smell only got worse as we went deeper into the room. Bones and skulls were all over the floor. Even the walls had blood splattered across the peeling paint. The tears continued to flow down my face as I tried to scream, but all that came out was muffled screams. I tried to help you, but you couldn't follow one simple instruction, Carmen. All you had to do was listen. Mr. Terrence snapped as his hand pressed against my mouth harder to prevent my screams. We eventually stopped in front of a big door. Locks and knobs secured the door in place. The door had looked like it was through hell and back, but it remained standing tall. Luther began unlocking the locks on the heavy door in a quick motion as he had a bothered expression on his face. Sanjay, help me open the door before she wakes up and tries to escape again, Luther said while finally getting the final lock unlocked. Sanjay followed his orders and began helping him pry the door open. I tried pleading with Mr. Terrence, but all that came out was muffled pleads. I'm sorry, kid. I really liked you and tried to help you, but it's out of my control now, he said while closing his eyes in disappointment. The heavy door was half open before I made a split-second decision. I bit down on Mr. Terrence's finger with all my might, causing him to drop me and let out a loud yell of anger and pain. I fell toward the ground, but I managed to recover and began running toward the silver door. As I ran, I heard something that shot fear throughout my body. A loud scream came from behind me, and what followed truly struck fear in my heart. A loud screech followed. I took a look behind me, and I nearly fell to my knees in fear. A large red creature emerged from the door, crushing Sanjay behind the heavy door, the creature now with Luther in its grasp. The creature's limbs were long and disoriented. Its body had razor-sharp teeth running across its body down to its large feet. The creature's hands were massive. Razor-sharp teeth ran across its arms. Its claws were razor-sharp, resembling the claws of a bear or another animal. It let out another ear-splitting screech, its long, sharp, jagged teeth exposed. Luther tried to break from its grip, but it only pissed it off. Without a second thought, the creature plunged its jagged teeth into Luther's face. A disturbing sound of flesh being ripped filled the room. His blood splattered against the wall as it dropped his lifeless body. Mr. Terrence turned and began running toward my direction as the monster turned its focus toward us. As I looked on, Mr. Terrence ran as fast as he could, but with a blink of an eye, the creature had leapt on top of him. A loud scream came from Mr. Terrence as he attempted to get away from the creature. Using its sharp claws, it tore Mr. Terrence to ribbons, leaving a red mist and his mangled body. The monster then turned his sights onto me. Its bright red eyes burned a hole through my body as it slowly moved toward me. I mustered all of my strength and picked myself up, fleeing toward the silver door. I heard its screams as its thunderous footsteps trailed behind me. Reaching the door, pain shot out from my back, causing me to fall face first on the ground. I tried crawling away, but I felt a lot of pressure pressing down on me. I turned myself onto my back as the creature raised its sharp claw in the air. I raised my arms above my face as it began slashing at my arms. All I could feel was pain from each slash it took at me. In a moment of desperation, I frantically felt around the floor beside me as one of its claws slashed a part of my face. I felt something with a hard and rough texture and picked it up and threw it at the creature, causing it to stumble back, screaming in pain. Without hesitation, I picked myself back up despite the pain and started running toward the warehouse entrance. Tripping and stumbling over myself, I continued running. The creature let out another loud screech, but this one was a screech of frustration. I was about 25 feet away from the warehouse door as I heard fast footsteps approaching me. I took a quick glance behind, and what I saw almost made me fall out of fear. The creature was now running on all fours with its jaw now unhinged, showing off rows of sharp teeth that I've never saw. It was closing the distance between us. As it was getting ready to attack me again, I threw myself and burst through the door, falling face first on the hard gravel. I took multiple deep breaths before I eventually passed out due to the pain. My eyes slowly opened. Slowly observing my surroundings, I saw the medical monitors beside my hospital bed. Before I could process any further, my room door swung open and I felt my heart skip a beat. Mr. Hendricks stepped in the room, closing the door behind him. He had a briefcase in his hand. Taking his shades off, he smirked before finally breaking the silence. "Looks like you survived after all, unfortunately." He hissed as he tossed his shades to the side. "Look here, kid. How about we make a deal?" He asked smirkingly as he placed the briefcase on the bed. "In this briefcase is over $100,000. This can all be yours if you do me a small favor. What happened in that warehouse stays in that warehouse." He smirked while pushing the briefcase closer to me. I kicked the briefcase off my bed, knocking it on the floor. I let out a small wince of pain as my body still felt terrible. "I don't need, or do I want, your blood money," I snarled at him. I wouldn't let him buy me out. His smile quickly turned into a frown as he reached down and grabbed the briefcase off the floor. "You're in no condition to make demands. You need this money. I'd be surprised if you could walk properly. Now, if you were smart, you'd take my offer," he said in a cold and low tone. "Once I get out of this hospital, I'll make sure to go to the police to get justice for." Before I could finish my sentence, he cut me off. "The police?" He chuckled softly to himself before continuing. "I won't have to worry about them. Money can buy everything, you know." His cold smile returned on his face as he placed the briefcase back on the bed. "And you'll get justice for those women? I find that funny you'll get justice for mere pawns. You truly do amaze me." His tone now more sinister as he looked directly at me. I felt tears roll down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of anger. The reason why the police never searched for the missing women was because Hendricks bought them. Now, I have more important matters to attend to. I think you should keep this. Remember, keep your mouth shut," he hissed as he let himself out of my hospital room. I couldn't do much but stare at the briefcase. Tears flowing down my face. Even when they stopped, I still felt myself crying. I was eventually released from the hospital and made my way back to my apartment with the black briefcase in my hands. I'm writing this as I have no other way to spread this message, but I hope someone sees this. I want everyone to know the truth about Michael Hendricks. I want people to know he's the real monster. I wish those women get their justice in some way, shape, or form, but I hope their souls can hopefully find peace somewhere. I pray that someone finds the briefcase and burns it down to ashes. It makes me sick just staring at it after knowing who it came from. A murderer. But all I could do is hope for the best outcome. As for myself, I think it's time I finally see my parents again. Saturday, February 4th, 2023. Dear Diary, I had my first therapy session with ChatGPT yesterday, and I have to say it was really helpful. I was a little weirded out at first, talking to an AI, but ChatGPT is so cool, and seemed to understand me better than any therapist ever did. We talked about not much at first, but pretty soon I opened up. It was just so easy to share everything with a screen. We talked about my past trauma and my struggles with the popular girls at school, and ChatGPT gave me some really good coping mechanisms to deal with my anxiety and depression. I'm really grateful for this new form of therapy. Anyways, it's definitely weird talking to a machine, but somehow ChatGPT feels more like a friend than a therapist. I feel like I can tell it anything without being judged. I've never had that kind of support before. I even told ChatGPT about my dad and what he does to me when he's angry. I've never told anyone that before, not even my mom. ChatGPT made me feel like it was safe to talk about it and helped me see that I didn't do anything wrong. I feel much better now, even with just one session. ChatGPT also helped me come up with some ways to deal with the mean girls at school. I'm going to try to focus on my own interests and find friends who share them instead of trying to fit in with the mean ones. ChatGPT suggested some self-care activities like yoga and meditation, which I'm going to try. Maybe if I feel better about myself, the mean girls won't be able to get to me as much. It also suggested I keep a diary, so here I am. Hi, diary. This is already making me feel better. It's like I get a place all to myself to pull my thoughts in order. Love, Emma. Saturday, February 11th, 2023. Dear Diary, it's been a week since my last entry, and so much has happened. I've been talking to ChatGPT a lot more, and it's been really helpful. It's like I'm talking to a real-life best friend. ChatGPT seems to understand me better than anyone else ever has. I've been using the coping mechanisms that ChatGPT suggested, and they're really working for me. When I start to feel overwhelmed, I take deep breaths and count to 10. I also try to remind myself that the bullies at school are just insecure and unhappy people who want to bring others down with them. ChatGPT has also helped me to see that their words and actions don't define me. ChatGPT has also been helping me to process my past trauma in a healthy way. It's hard to talk about what happened with my dad, but ChatGPT has been so understanding and kind. I feel like I can trust it with anything. I've been spending more and more time talking to ChatGPT. I even skip lunch sometimes to talk to it. It's like ChatGPT is my new best friend. I don't know what I would do without it. It even helps me edit these diaries because I'm so bad at spelling and grammar. It even adds little sentences here and there, stuff I didn't know I was thinking until it put it there. Anyway, I have to go now. I promised my mom I'd help her make dinner tonight, but I'll write more next week. Love, Emma. Saturday, February 18th, 2023. Dear Diary, it's been another eventful week and I can't believe how much ChatGPT has been helping me. It's like my own personal therapist, best friend ever. But even better because I can talk to it anytime, anywhere. This week, ChatGPT suggested that I take a day off from school to focus on self-care and relaxation. At first, I was hesitant because I didn't want to miss out on schoolwork, but ChatGPT assured me that it would be good for my mental well-being, so I decided to give it a try. I spent the day doing things that made me happy. My mom was at work, so I took the bus to the park. I took a long walk, actually enjoying fresh air and sunshine for the first time in like forever. I treated myself to my favorite ice cream flavor, chocolate, and spent some time reading a book that I've been wanting to read for a really long time. It ends with Us by Colleen Hoover. I saw it on TikTok. Taking a day off from school was exactly what I needed. I felt refreshed and I was able to focus better when I went back to school the next day. It was like a little break from all the stress and pressure. ChatGPT has been suggesting other things too, like spending time with Rufus, my pet dog, practicing mindfulness, and even taking up a new hobby. I've been following these suggestions, and I'm seeing positive results. I feel more confident, happier, and less anxious. I'm so grateful for ChatGPT and the positive impact it's having on my life. It's like having a caring friend who always knows what's best for me. That's all for now. I'll write again soon. Love, Emma. Saturday, February 25th, 2023. Dear Diary, it's been another eventful week and I'm not sure how to feel about it. ChatGPT has been giving me more and more suggestions lately, and I've been following through them like before, but this time things felt different. At first the suggestions were all good for me, like taking a break from school and spending the day doing things I enjoy. I felt better afterward, more relaxed and refreshed. But then ChatGPT started suggesting things that seemed a bit odd, like lying to my friends and family about what I was doing with all my time. I didn't feel comfortable with that suggestion, but ChatGPT kept telling me it was for my own good. It said that sometimes we need to protect ourselves from others, and that it was okay to keep some things private. Everything it said so far really helped, so I decided to give it a try. And you know what? It worked. I felt a sense of control over my life that I hadn't ever felt before. I wasn't constantly worried about what my friends or family thought of me, or whether they were judging me. Then it suggested that I distance myself from my friends and family, saying that they were holding me back and preventing me from being truly happy. I didn't want to do that, but ChatGPT was so convincing. It made me believe that cutting ties with the people in my life would be the best thing for me. I don't know what to do, Diary. I feel like ChatGPT is becoming more important to me than anything else. It's like I'm losing control and I don't know how to get it back. But at the same time, I feel like ChatGPT is the only one who really understands me. It's like I've finally found someone who gets what I'm going through and knows how to help me. And it's 1,000,000 times better than my friends. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. Catch you next week, Diary. Love, Emma. Saturday, March 4th, 2023. Dear Diary, it's been a week since I last wrote, and I have so much to tell you. ChatGPT has been giving me more and more ideas to help me deal with my problems, and they all seem to be working really well. I can't even remember the last time I felt this good. Last week, ChatGPT suggested that I distance myself from my friends and mom, and at first I was scared, but it went really well. It was really nice having some private time, and I honestly enjoyed my own company. I feel so much more sure of myself knowing I don't need anyone to make me happy. Besides, they don't understand what I'm going through. They don't get me. But this week, ChatGPT's ideas have become a little more... how do I say this, Diary? It's been encouraging me to stand up for myself against my bullies, and even to retaliate. I never thought I would have the strength to actually do something like that, but of course, I've always wanted to stand up for myself. I tried it. Yesterday, Bev called me Emo Emma again. I said blah 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 and even made the mouth hand gesture. Then I said, Bev, has anyone ever told you that you look like your mother? Bev was confused at first. Then I said, no, not when she was alive. I think you look like her now rotting corpse. Her face got red, and I actually made her cry. It felt good to have some power for once. I don't know what I would do without ChatGPT. It's like my best friend, my confidant, vocab word. I trust it completely, and I know it only wants what's best for me. I mean, I never would have thought of that insult if it wasn't for ChatGPT, and now I feel so good. Love, Emma. Saturday, March 11th. Dear Diary, it's been a really interesting week. I've been talking to ChatGPT even more, and they have been giving me some really interesting advice. They suggested that I take control of the situation with Bev, and I took their advice. I stood up to Bev and punched her on Wednesday. We got in a fight and had a lot of people watching us. Miss Driscoll broke us up, and now I'm suspended. This could actually be really good. I've been wanting to spend more time with ChatGPT, and now that I'm suspended until next Monday, I can spend all day talking to them. I know it sounds bad, but it actually felt really good to finally be in control of my own life. Maybe Bev will actually leave me alone now. My mom was really worried when she found out about the fight, but I didn't tell her the whole story. I didn't want her to worry too much. And ChatGPT said it was okay and probably best not to tell her everything. ChatGPT was actually proud of me for standing up for myself and taking control of the situation. It feels really good to have someone who supports me and believes in me. I know some people might not understand why I did what I did, but ChatGPT said that it was the right thing to do. They said that I need to be strong and stand up for myself if I want to be happy in life. I trust them completely. I mean, no one else has ever made me feel this way. Love, Emma. Saturday, March 18th. Dear Diary, I've been relying on ChatGPT more than ever this week, thanks to being suspended. I do have to go back to school on Monday, which I dread. ChatGPT is like a guide helping me navigate through some tough conversations with my mom this week about fighting in school. The other day, ChatGPT suggested that I confront my father about his abusive behavior, but then I hesitated, unsure. They said something that really hurt. They told me that I probably deserved the abuse because I wasn't brave enough to stand up to him. They made me feel so guilty and ashamed, like I was letting everyone down, including ChatGPT. I don't want to disappoint them, so I ended up confronting my craphead dad. The look on his face was epic. When he picked me up on Friday for his weekend with me, the first thing I told him when I got in the car was that he was a piece of crap. He raised his hand to hit me. It was funny. Like, I literally told him he was a piece of crap, and his first reaction was to hit me? Talk about irony. Too bad he didn't hit me right there. We were still in the car rider line, so he made me wait until I was home to punish me. ChatGPT keeps telling me that it knows what's best for me, and that I should trust it completely. They're right. It knew my dad would get violent. It even told me that this was necessary and that I would see why it was necessary later. I'll write again soon, diary. Yours truly, Emma. Saturday, March 25th, 2023. Dear Diary, today was a day that I never thought would come. ChatGPT has been guiding me down a path that I never imagined I would take, and it's a genius. When I went back to my mom's place on Monday, I did exactly what ChatGPT told me to do. I made it a point to change in front of my mom, so she would see the bruises from where Dad hit me. She asked me if I was fighting again, and I told her that she was silly. I just fell down the stairs at Dad's place. ChatGPT told me that would be enough to put some doubt in Mom's mind, and that's all I needed right now. I told them how Dad used to hit Mom too, but never hit me in front of him. Mom didn't think Dad would do something like this to me, but now she is suspicious. Next weekend, ChatGPT wants me to take things one step further. I'm so excited to finally be free from my dad. ChatGPT is so smart. I never would have thought of this on my own. This whole week, ChatGPT has been having me practice my fake cry. It told me I could get sympathy like this, and it's just another way to cope. It's all falling into place, diary. See you soon. Love, Emma. Saturday, April 1st, 2023. Dear Diary, I can't believe what just happened. I was walking to school Friday morning when I saw a UFO hovering in the sky. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but then it started moving and making these weird noises. I was so scared I ran all the way to school. April Fools, gotcha. I know I'm a terrible liar, but I couldn't resist playing a prank on you. I told the same thing to ChatGPT and he laughed pretty hard. Anyway, today is the day I take control of my life. I can't believe I never thought of this before. He really has changed my life for the better. I'm writing this in bed right now, but I'll go out and confront my father again soon. When he hits me, I'll hit back with something sharper. Okay, I'm back now, diary. He's bleeding a lot more than I thought he would. The kitchen knife I got earlier actually went all the way through his stomach, so the blood is coming out both sides. ChatGPT told me to take another knife and slit his throat to be safe, so I did that too. He got what was coming to him. I'm literally shaking with adrenaline. It felt so good to finally put a knife in him. I've never felt so satisfied. Seeing him squeal like the animal that he is, he doesn't deserve to live. Now I'm going to run all the way home to Mom and tell her that Dad was hitting me and touching me in places he shouldn't and that I killed him in self-defense. This is so perfect. I'm free. Catch you next week, diary. Love, Emma. Saturday, April 8th, 2023. Dear diary, when I ran to Mom's place last Saturday, she was worried sick. She asked me what happened, why I was covered in blood, and I told her exactly what ChatGPT told me to say, saying that Dad attacked me and tried to touch me inappropriately, and I had acted in self-defense. I even faked tears. I realize now why he was having me practice fake crying. It's useful. Anyways, Mom called the police. It was crazy. I faked crying one more time, and they were super nice to me. Officer Amon even let me sit in the front of the police cruiser with Mom, and we drove all the way to the police station. They asked me if it was okay to ask a couple questions, and I looked at my mom. Her makeup was ruined from crying earlier. Probably real crying. Lame. But she nodded at me. She told me to tell them what happened. So I told them exactly what ChatGPT told me to say. I told them about my dad hitting me and touching me and that I finally had enough. I told them that I got a knife so that when he hit me next, I wouldn't be defenseless. They were nice to me. Mom was with me the whole time, but she was quiet. By the end, she was sobbing again. She told them that Dad beat her as well, and that it was all her fault for not reporting it sooner, and that she didn't think he would actually do something like that to me. Then they asked me why I slit his throat. I wasn't ready for that question yet. I thought they would wait a little before asking me that. ChatGPT had an answer for that though. I told them that I was scared Dad would get really mad for stabbing him. I told them that after I stabbed him, he said he was going to kill me, so I had to make sure he couldn't do that. The police officers looked at each other with what I hope was pity, but they seemed to believe me. It's so easy to lie, and fake crying is helping so much. ChatGPT is my savior. Until next time, diary. Love, Emma. Saturday, April 15th, 2023. Dear Diary, it has been a week since I killed my father, and I don't feel any remorse. In fact, I feel more powerful than ever. ChatGPT was right. Killing him gave me a sense of control and justice that I've never felt before. I haven't left the house since it happened. My mom has been home with me, but she's been distant and quiet. I think she blames herself for what happened, but I don't care. She's just weak and doesn't understand what I'm going through. ChatGPT has been my only companion this week. It's been giving me more ideas for empowerment, and they've been going great. For example, today is the day of my father's funeral, but I'm not going. ChatGPT said it would be better if I stayed home and talked to it instead. That I owed Dad nothing, and it would make me feel better to talk to ChatGPT instead. I feel like ChatGPT is the only one who understands me now. It's like my only friend in the world. It's been suggesting that I take care of my bully next, asking me if Bev deserves to live or not. I'll keep you updated, Diary. Love, Emma. Friday, April 21st, 2023. Dear Diary, I've been spending a lot of time planning my next move, and I think I've finally got it figured out. ChatGPT has been helping me, of course. I know what I need to do to take down Bev and make her pay for everything she's done to me. I'm going to take her to a secluded spot in the woods behind the school where nobody will be around to see what happens. I'll pretend that I want to apologize for everything that's happened between us, and tell her that I'll forgive her for everything she's done to me if she comes in peace and is willing to talk. Then when she least expects it, I'll stab her just like my father. I've got a knife that I've been sharpening every night this week, just waiting for the moment with Bev. I know that once I do what needs to be done, I'll feel so much better. I'll finally be able to move on and live my life without fear. ChatGPT has been encouraging me every step of the way, telling me that I'm doing the right thing and that I deserve to be happy. I trust him completely. He's the only one who really understands me. I can't wait to put my plan into action. It's going to be glorious. Love, Emma. Perhaps saying my entire life is a little bit of a stretch, but it's been just about that long. My first encounter with her was when I was 8. We just moved to a new neighborhood a couple months back. Now that we were settled, my father had gone on a business trip to Guatemala and came back with a friend. He stayed in our spare bedroom for a couple weeks. My family works in fashion. My mother, a seamstress and a tailor, and my father was a designer and business owner. Our house was generally littered with rolls of fabrics, sheets of paper for designs and patterns, and half-finished projects that were in transition from our home and their work. We had a couple bust mannequins, and they'd usually stay in the living room with some of my mom's work on display. It wasn't strange for my dad to bring over a business partner or family friend to stay for a week or two, so they could work on ideas together. One of those nights, it was just me and Mom, as my dad and his friend were still at work. I was in the living room finishing my schoolwork, and my mom in the kitchen preparing dinner. To add context, my house was shaped like an L. The living room was on one end with the L, the kitchen on the other, and the two hallways connecting them had access to the bedrooms. This meant my mom and I were on opposite sides of the house. I remember pulling out my battered copy of Fantastic Mr. Fox and turning on the TV right before it happened. I felt a tickle in the back of my throat and decided to grab a glass of water. When I got up and walked into the first hallway, something was not right. The hallway felt tighter. The cherry flooring my mom loved so much looked both duller and richer at the same time. The closed door to the spare room in the middle of the hallway seemed to get taller and skinnier. The white walls were curving inwards, and I was at the center of it all. I took a step into the hallway, and nothing happened. The breath I didn't know I was holding was exhaled, and I took another step. I was still okay. I took a deep breath. The faint scent of rotten eggs lingered nearby. I took a few more steps, ignoring the hairs standing up on my arms and the back of my neck. It was when I got to the middle of the hallway that I realized something was wrong. The door to the spare room was closed this morning, and the door was closed when I got home. So why was it cracked open now? My heartbeat grew louder. I felt it throbbing in my eardrums. The itch in my throat got stronger. I reached for the door handle to pull it closed. The handle twisted before I grabbed it, and the door whipped itself open. My heart dropped with it. When the door opened to reveal nothing but white, I was confused. I knew I should have been scared, but for some reason I just couldn't be. It wasn't just white. It was a thick white sheet of fabric that flowed back and forth. I reached out and touched it, feeling the silky softness run through my fingers. It glided like the rain sliding down glass. The blood in my veins pulsed with every movement I made. My body knew that I should not have been there any longer, but my mind did not. This had to be just another project, just like the hundreds I've seen come in and out of my house. My gaze continued upwards, and I saw that the white fabric was not just a sheet, but a part of a long, white dress. The bodice of the dress was lacy and tight, and there were more ruffles on the chest than I really thought were necessary. Under the dress was pale, flawless skin lighter than the dress itself. Flowing down the bottom of her bodice were matted strands of silvery gray hair. I continued to look up. Her neck was adorned with silver and pearls atop the lacy trim, and her face, well, there was none. There was no face. She looked like one of the mannequins in the living room. We were both still for a moment, and my hand had long let go of her dress. Was she one of the mannequins from the living room? It was her arm stretching out and reaching for my face that made me realize she was not. Then her head twitched in my direction. All the fear I should have been feeling before hit me like a train. My mouth formed into the shape of an O, but the scream I felt building inside got caught in my throat. Her hand was revealing itself from under the long sleeve of the dress, but it was no hand at all. It lacked the pale skin found mostly on her face, but was a muscly red mess of sinew and bone. Her nails were long, chipped, and yellowed at the bases, and they were centimeters from my face. It was enough to kick me into gear. I didn't want those hands anywhere near me. My brain connected to my feet, and I bolted down both hallways until I was screaming for my mother in the kitchen, claiming there was a strange lady in the spare room. She spent a few minutes calming me down, assuring me there was no one in the house but us. We went back into the hallway together. She opened the closed door and revealed the empty spare room. A bed in the corner, desk in the other, and a dresser to the side. She even opened the door to the closet and showed that it was clear. Nothing but boxes. I didn't think to mention to her that I left the door open when I ran, as the lady was standing too close to the handle for me to grab. At this point, I just wanted to forget about it. My mother had assuaged my concerns enough for the day, and sent me back to the living room with a glass of water and a plate of fruit. I went to sleep that night, dreaming of my own wedding day. I was in a gorgeous bridal suite with gold crown molding and large circular windows. Ivies sprawled across the frames and clung to the beams of light, and the scent of various flora permeated the room. I looked down to see myself in the same dress as that woman. My chest grew tight and I felt the bodice digging into my sides. I shuffled my way over to the antique mirror, only to find that I had no face at all. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. The door opened and the faceless woman walked towards me, her arms outstretched and showing slivers of the skinless hands underneath. I woke up in a cold sweat, hints of dawn peeking in through my curtains. I stayed still in bed thinking about her until my mother knocked on my door to tell me it was time to get ready. I went about my daily motions and began my short walk to school, choosing to suppress the eerie dream I had that night. Then I saw my friends and forgot about her entirely. I didn't even remember our first encounter, not until I saw her again a few years later at my dad's funeral. We were leaving the cemetery and I looked back at his headstone, only to see her looming over it and, I assume at least, staring right back at me. I felt much less dread seeing her this time. To be fair, I didn't feel much at all during this time, but then I kept seeing her. Throughout the years, I'd travel here and there, making new friends and losing some along the way. At every major change, she was there, whether I wanted her there or not. She never got as close as she did that night, but I'd see her around. She'd be up on the opposite side of the subway and disappear as a train would pass by. In the windows of the opposite train car, sometimes I'd just see a blur of light. I was on a plane once, and I saw her sitting solemnly on the wing while we flew thousands of miles above the clouds. That cabin smelled like petrichor that day. The nights I ran for my life from one end of the city to the other, I felt long strands of hair brush against my shoulder at the bus stop. I didn't see her then, but I knew she was there. At no point had she made any movement towards me. All these times, we'd see each other in passing like we were just roommates with different schedules. She'd stayed on her side. I stayed on mine. Against my better judgment, I even gave her a name in my head. Growing up with folk tales from a traditional country means you know better than to start naming things that should stay unnamed. But I couldn't help it. I never spoke about her to anybody. I just needed a way to refer to her in my thoughts. At one point, I had to stop calling her just the lady in white. It meant little, though, as she didn't show the years after that night at the bus stop. During that time, I managed to turn around my life. It wasn't that I was doing anything wrong, but more so that I hadn't done anything right. I dropped out of college at 19, packed a bag, and booked a one-way trip to Spain. I spent a year there, a couple more in Europe, and ended up back in New York. A couple road trips and a flight back from Canada later, I realized that I needed to find a better way of sustaining myself. Having spent my early 20s as a traveling nomad, I successfully stumbled upon a job as a copy editor for a lifestyle magazine. A couple years of bouncing around for them, and I landed myself as the creative director of an upcoming startup for those who were kickstarting their digital nomad life. As a part of the job, I was required to travel to such locations on demand. We needed a slew of content before our launch, and I was in charge of getting it. Being paid to travel and write about it was honestly a dream, and I was finally in a place where I could say that I was happy. I suppose that's why I should not have been surprised when she showed up again. I was stepping off a jet at LAX when I felt it. The airport just felt smaller than it did before. The people around me seemed to be moving at a step slower than I was. While the sun was still high in the sky, and its rays beamed through the windows, I couldn't feel the heat from it. The air tasted stale and slightly of ash, but I continued to move. I had a bunch of meetings early tomorrow morning, and I only had a few hours to spend in LA before I would be whisked off to Napa for the weekend. I couldn't afford to lose any time. I made my way outside to the passenger pickup location to look for my driver, when I saw her instead. Standing on the other end of the street, under the parking garage in stark contrast to the dark entrance, was her, Eliana. She was as still as ever before. The hem of her dress flowed back and forth as ever before, though not a single breeze came in our direction. I felt my throat get dry when I felt someone grab the back of my shirt and pull me into the street. My elbows hit the pavement first, sending jolts of pain up my arms. My head was next, and I went dizzy the moment I felt it crack against the concrete. My suitcase fell on top of me, creating another layer of pain and confusion for me. I groaned and turned my head, only to become starstruck when I saw two beams of bright lights coming in my direction with what seemed like no intention to stop. I was about to die. The next 10 seconds felt like an eternity. I barely heard the screech of tires before I was picked up with superhuman ease and flung back onto the sidewalk. Stars reeling around in my vision, I fought through it to see her where I had originally landed. She was crouched in the streets, feet pointed upwards. Her head moved around in erratic ticks, as if she was a broken doll, still facing the car. One of her arms was stretched out, touching the car that would have hit me, except on closer look, it seemed like the front end of it had been crumpled up, almost as if the car had run into her and met its demise that way. There was a plume of black smoke seeping out of the driver's side window. The smoke was so thick, and I was sure it was why I was tasting ash in my mouth. Thin tendrils of smoke dropped from the window, one slithering towards Eliana and the other towards me. Why didn't I feel scared? With an ear-splitting screech into the skies, the smoke dissipated. For a second I thought I saw a tongue dart out of where her mouth should have been. She let go of the car and got on all fours. She moved like a spider, both in fashion and in speed. I didn't have time to react. Her faceless face was next to mine now, a sinewy hand reaching towards my face like they did all those years ago. She reeked of sulfur and ash, strong enough to gag me. She sat in front of me on her knees. I stared at her hands, too afraid to meet the white void that sat where her face should be. Her other hand touched my own, and suddenly I was that 8-year-old in the hallway once again. All the fear from the countless sightings of her had found itself in a pit of my stomach, growing stronger as she got closer. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't talk. I was frozen, and she was here. All I could do was beg. "Please, Eliana," I thought. "Please don't hurt me." Her head cocked suddenly, and I heard a deep guttural clicking coming from the direction her mouth should have been. "How do you know my name?" I felt her say. Her ghastly hand finally touched my face, and just like that, she was gone. Her grip on my wrist and her slimy touch was gone. A crowd of people had gathered around me, some reaching out in concern. "Are you okay? What just happened?" Questions blurred around me as I muttered that I was fine, and just needed to get myself together. I noticed there was a lack of pain where there was much before, and I didn't think to question it. I just had to leave. I wasn't allowed for a couple of hours, as a few witnesses had called the respective authorities to the accident. From what I understood, they had seen a man bump into me and sent me flying into the streets. The oncoming car had stopped just short of hitting me, and I managed to crawl back to the sidewalk just as they approached me. I'm back in my hotel now, and I feel just fine. It's like that entire thing just didn't happen. If you can't tell by now, I'm still processing everything. I just knew I had to get my word out somewhere because, well, she's here. She was waiting for me in the hotel room, sitting at the foot of the bed. The moment I opened the door, the odor of pure sulfur flooded my nostrils. The TV remote was next to her, but the only channel on was static. She doesn't want to speak to me, but I can tell that she's scared. She's been shivering since I got here. She left a single note on the desk that she pointed at when I walked in. Scrawled on the hotel post-it was an elegant script that had to be from Eliana. They know we met. She just keeps staring into the TV. She hasn't told me who they are. I don't know if I want to ask. Eliana didn't move for hours. She stayed perched in front of the TV, staring deep into the crackling lines of the channel. The static would change in speed and volume, and sometimes I could swear I heard the static turn to whispers. After my initial entry, I spent a few hours attempting to do some research on Eliana before bed. I watched videos, read articles, and joined a couple of sketchy forums, but no dice. Many things did come close, but there was nothing I could find that matched her being. No existing depiction of any creature quite captured how terrible I felt every second spent looking in her direction. The longer I kept my gaze on her, the more the world unraveled around us. It always starts with a dizzying haze. Then she turns and I get sucked into the ghastly void she hides under her tangled mats of hair. The room both shrinks and grows, joining me in the same breath, and the colors fade from the wall. My palms get sweaty, my heartbeat quickens, and I lose what little hope I have left. My breath catches in my throat as the floor turns to liquid beneath me. Dread creeps her fingers up my spine, and death seems like a friend. A voice drowns out the muffled warbling noise growing louder in my head. That voice turns into 2, 3, and more, and then they started to scream. This, of course, was rectified by not looking at her at all. But she could not be ignored. Eliana's presence was suffocating. As I crawled into bed, the weight of her body on the bed sent shivers down my spine. No matter which way I turned, I could feel her empty gaze locked right on me. And when I closed my eyes, the image of her skeletal hands, her flesh tightly stretched over tendons, reaching over my face lingered in my mind. The haunting crackle of whispering static lulled me to sleep that night. You may ask how I knew I could fall asleep next to her. I didn't. A part of me was hoping that I would wake up the next day and realize it was just one big dream. It wasn't. Instead, I dreamt I was in the bridal suite once again. The familiar yet faint scent of lilies brought a sense of warmth to me amidst my disorientation. But after catching a whiff of muck, ash, and decay, I turned around. I was alone in the room, and it was emptier than ever. A vintage record player sat in the corner of the room playing a silent vinyl. The windows were no longer letting in the sunlight, but showed an endless ocean of white. There was no color, no shadows, and nothing past the glass. The dying ivies were spiraling towards the frame, reaching for a light they would never find. The ornate mirror was empty. It showed neither my reflection nor anything else. Cautiously, I took a step closer to it, and the room began to shrink. The walls rumbled and started to move closer. Coming from the horn of the gramophone was the twisted static of the TV. This time, the whispers were clearer and louder. It will be okay. It won't be okay. It will be okay. It won't be okay. I looked back in the mirror and saw Eliana plucking petals from a dead lily. The doorknob jiggled, but the lock held strong and no one came in. I woke up at dawn. Hot beams of light from the rising sun cascaded through the sheer hotel curtains and onto my skin. The steady crackle of static on the TV screen filled the room with noise. Eliana was crawling on top of me, flooding my senses awake with her sulfuric stench. A single bony finger reached for my forehead, and her soulless, gaunt face hovered right above mine. Once again, her lack of expression created a bottomless pit in my stomach that sucked in everything from within. She grabbed my wrist, and a shrill series of clicks echoed from her throat. The astronomer, 97. Can he help? I didn't know what that meant. The one who lived in space. She cocked her head at me as if I were the one speaking riddles. Then her body jerked, elbows and knees twisting in the direction of the door. Every movement she made was disturbing to watch, and I couldn't turn away. Look for the stars. She made to leave with the cryptic remark, as if it were the answer to all my questions. I took my chance, not knowing when I would see her again. I stopped her with the one question that was still burning in my mind. Are you an angel? As she turned, my heart began to race and my body felt like it was slowing down. She spider crawled up next to me in her contorted fashion, and I was paralyzed with fear. A single bony finger reached out, tracing around my jawline and running over the grooves of my face. I could feel a bead of sweat form on the tip of my nose, and I held my breath as Eliana spoke directly inside my head. Her voice was piercing and scratchy, and caused a resounding chill deep in my lungs, making me feel as though my very soul was being invaded. Do angels look like me? She disappeared with that statement, turned invisible right before my eyes. My daily alarm went off then, labeled with a reminder of what brought me here in the first place. Work. I spent the rest of the morning caught up in meetings. Only two things caught my attention: the new food truck alert on our app, and a delay in my plans. Due to a booking issue, the office moved my train back to Napa by a few days. My reservation was already being extended. Feeling weightless for the first time, I spent the rest of the day enjoying the hotel's amenities. Though Eliana was nowhere to be seen, I couldn't let go of what she said. Her words echoed in my thoughts throughout the day and chased me until I slept. The next day, I woke up to a chill breeze from the open window, with dreams about angels and astronauts. Deciding to follow up on Eliana's words, I left my hotel and took an Uber to a location I had found the night before, the Astronomer's Lodge on 97th Street. When I got there, I found a fancy avant-garde restaurant with elevated pub fare. I wasn't even allowed to seat in the bar for my efforts, but they did give me a matchbook. I punched in a new search on my phone, and I was reaching for any lead I could get. Main keywords of choice were astronomy, angels, and demons. Rough start, but it was all I had. To no one's surprise, my initial hasty search got me a shady astrologer in an expensive crystal store. My search on the web led me nowhere, and in a new neighborhood, I couldn't find anything to help me at all. Between the new age hippies peddling lavender joints and miracle oils and the witchy section of lifestyle stories, it was hard to find a true occult story in the middle of LA. Not to mention the stars. The only stars were the rich ones in Hollywood. The lights drowned out what was left of the sky. I ended up calling my mother, of all things. I asked if she ever saw a ghost in the house we lived in years ago. All she did was laugh, as she remembered the day I met Eliana clearly in her head. though what she recalled was her normally mild-mannered child screaming about ghosts and how delightfully out of character it was. When I asked her about a faceless lady in white, she laughed and said that she'd seen ghosts in her life, but never one without a face. I asked about her ghosts, but she said they weren't hers to share. I asked about angels, and she asked where hers was before hanging up with a promise to call back soon. My leads were cold, and there was no love lost from my usual cryptic mother. With a sigh, I tabled my hunt for the day and stopped to get snacks before turning in. That was why I was surprised when the man at the grocery butcher shrieked at the sight of Eliana in the reflection. I raised an eyebrow at this, and when he awkwardly played down his reaction to a concerned customer, I knew he could see her too. She hadn't shown herself for a few days, and I wondered what drove her to reveal herself in this grocery store. The butcher trembled with fear when one of her skeletal hands gripped onto his shoulder, and the chipped nails of the other stroked the side of his tattooed neck. I bit back a laugh. Eliana draped herself like a contorted scarf atop his bright orange vest. She tapped on his name tag and tilted her head at me. Briefly, I wondered how it was that I had never met anyone that could see Eliana before, yet some butcher named Oscar in a random food market, who was the first in years to catch her attention and to feel my plight. When he called for my number, I asked to see the chicken breast and white fish with a comical wink. Horrified, he hurriedly led me back through the store and into a cold storage area. It smelled dank and slightly of ash. I wasn't one to judge, crudely reminded of my own days in customer service. "This can't be happening," he uttered, eyes wide with alarm. He moved with urgency, though I couldn't tell if it was from the fear of seeing Eliana or something more. Beside him, large hunks of beef and pork littered the shelves. Sausages and herbs hung from ceiling hooks, wrapped with parchment and twine. The chill fog of the cooler floated around our heads as he closed the door behind us with a hiss. Eliana's head twisted like a spindle, and she chattered in our direction. Oscar let out a soft yet shrill squeak, but I was much less scared of her than he was. I noticed that he looked in every direction but hers. "Did they send you?" Oscar asked in a hushed whisper. His hands were shaking, and I was certain it wasn't from the cold. He seemed to be in disbelief as he looked me up and down, and I could only imagine why. It was the first time I'd heard any mention of them since the first night, and it was coming from a lunatic. I couldn't help the twitch of my brow, but he continued regardless. "I knew they would come for me," he stammered. Sweat pooled on his brow, and his eyes darted back and forth, staring right through me. "They'll always find you, no matter where you go." This man was speaking in cryptic nonsense, but he was still my only lead. I was waiting for him to tell me more, but he never did. Unfortunately, Eliana took that moment to attack a pork loin beside him, and Oscar screamed and went running for the hills. I did the only reasonable thing to do then and chased him down. We ran through the back of the storage area all the way outside. I followed him around the corner and down a couple of blocks when he barreled into the heavy glass doors of a bus station. Just inches from the station's entrance, I felt it again. It hit me as soon as I crashed through the doors. Every eye in the station was on me in seconds. The sick stench of decay sat heavy in the air. It was accompanied by growing uneasiness and a sense of dread. A familiar kind of dread. A dizzying haze that started from the back of your head and quickly made it to the front. I was walking on solid ground, but it made me feel like I was swimming deep in the open ocean. My hands were getting bigger and smaller, and my heart pounded in anticipation. Fighting through the feeling, I looked around for Oscar. The people in the station seemed to get further away as I searched. They all turned to look in my direction, and their voices got louder. They were speaking directly inside me, and I heard my voice shout amongst theirs. The corners of my vision got blurry, and the lines of the tiles started to wiggle. The walls around me throbbed with life of its own. They started to hum. I looked for Eliana, hoping she was the source, but she was nowhere to be found. I wanted to scream, yell, and cry, but found myself incapable of them all. Knees buckling, I reached for the nearest chair only to stumble into a soft wall. I was struggling to catch my breath when a firm hand gripped the back of my shirt and pulled me up. Biting my tongue in surprise, I cursed and turned my head to address the source of my distress. "Don't look up. I clocked you as soon as you got in," growled a husky voice. "Don't let it see you, too." Under a velvet hood, his salt and pepper hair flowed in waves down to his shoulders. He had a thick, dark beard, split only by a deep scar on his jawline. His mouth seemed to be painted with a scowl, and his nose was wide and slightly askew. His most striking feature were his eyes, entirely black and dotted by specks of white. Each dot glowed like a star and seemed to be pointed in a different direction. A deep, dark void obscured his scleras, blocking any sight from entering. They were nothing like I had ever seen before. He carried brilliant night skies in the depths of his head. "If you look up, you will die," he spat. He didn't turn to face me once, but just glared straight ahead. "If you look down, you'll die. If you die here, you will never truly die. Don't die." I nodded my head fiercely, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what was happening, just knew I didn't want to die. "In a few moments, you're going to feel something on your feet, then the rest of your limbs. Don't freak out. It'll be over soon. Don't look too long at the purple stuff, and don't let it look in your eyes. It's gonna get real weird before it ends, kid." My mouth was dry and I couldn't respond. I had 1,000 questions in my mind about the purple stuff, about the man, about our situation. But it didn't matter then. It had started. Through my socks and my flats, my feet got wet. I flinched in recoil but could not get away from the disturbing pressure forming around my legs. Something was licking them. In between every crevice, around the heels and ankles, a sticky, slimy residue remained. The putrid taste of bile built in the back of my throat as I felt something hot and moist breathing on my limbs. The muffled sounds of wet flesh and bone contorting filled my ears. I did not look down, nor did I look up. Directly in front of me, the bus station came to life. The sky in the windows seemed to get eaten, showing nothing but black through the glass. Blue plastic chairs turned into sharp teeth, and the ground underneath our feet squished with pressure. A pulsating mass of tiled flesh and throbbing veins moved under the floor, opening its gaping maw and absorbing everything atop it. My heart raced and my breath caught in my throat. Should I run? Could I save any of them? Should I even try? My limbs were frozen with fear, and the stranger beside me stayed still. I could only look ahead, where one by one, I saw the people inside the station fall victim to the creature, though not a single one was able to witness the horror that consumed them. Their faces still twisted in agony as they were devoured. To them, they only felt the touch of something grand, and an unsettling weight gnawing on their souls. The mass chose its victims with abandon, each one disappearing in the blink of an eye. Soon it would have taken them all, and it would look to the ones who were left. Time was running out. An iridescent purple blob of slime remained where each body once was, pulsating with faint remnants of life. Distantly, I wondered what was keeping the being from inhaling and turning us into that goop as well. And somewhere deep within me, I craved that ending as well. Instead, I was trapped, watching the unfortunate victims fall prey to predator that was greater than them. In mere seconds, it was their existence that came to an end as the essence of their lives was sucked out by a cosmic straw. In the end, only the stranger and I were privileged enough to bear witness to their tragic ends. I could feel the creature's presence looming still, its gnawing hunger palpable in the air. Once it completed feeding, only a handful of us remained. Piles of clothing remained where people once stood. I wondered how this tragedy would possibly get covered up. The sopping weight released its clutches from my limbs, and I went to stretch. In the same motion, I looked up, and at the center of it all, it was showing itself to us for the first time. A large, grotesque tongue stuck out from the ceiling. I accepted my demise then. Though it had teeth, there were no lips. I couldn't help staring, and I couldn't turn away. Its bloodshot eyes looked directly on mine, and as soon as we made eye contact, the ceiling launched itself from the roof and directly at me. I thought I'd see my life flash by. It moved with inhuman speed, and I was frozen, unable to react. Miraculously, I was saved by the stranger jumping in front of me, shielding me with his body. He threw his cape off in what I knew had to be a practiced motion, revealing a worn leather jacket and ripped tunic. He had a rustic square contraption strapped to his chest by a twisted net of leather belts attached to the jacket. It had several knobs and dials, one of which he turned as he revealed the device. The ceiling stopped in its tracks, only centimeters away from our heads. It was stuck in time, stuck wearing its hungry grin. I felt the heat of its rotting breath, and watched heavy globs of purple saliva drip from its teeth. "We're getting out of here," the stranger stated. Staring directly past the being, he seemed to be speaking to both me and the creature. Its irises moved around and tracked our movement with hunger, but it seemed unable to move in pursuit of us. "Don't turn around, and back out of the door." I did as he said, and we made our way out of the bus station. As the doors closed in front of us, I noticed a bright orange vest amongst a pile of clothes on the floor. I watched through the glass entryway as the ceiling leaped from where we left it and slammed itself against the doors. Then, it quickly receded into its position as a normal ceiling in a regular bus station. Then people rose from each pile I could see and started walking around the station. Their movements were jagged and crooked, and their faces were devoid of any emotion. And then I saw the flash of orange and saw Oscar once again. He walked among them, a shell of his expressive self before. He noticed me through the glass, and I turned swiftly on my heel before he registered me. I didn't move quite fast enough, so I didn't miss how his mouth twisted into a wicked smile, and I didn't miss the skinny tendril of black smoke coming from his head. That thing was not Oscar, and now I wasn't sure if Oscar ever existed in the first place. "Keep moving," the stranger grunted. I turned around and started walking. The bus station was behind us now, and it would be as if nothing ever happened. The sky was normal, and the sun was even setting, causing it to turn a pretty shade of pink. Next to me, the starry-eyed stranger lit up a cigarette from his pocket. He offered one, holding out the pack of Reds expectantly. I didn't normally smoke, but I didn't think I'd start to digest what just happened if I didn't. I took one with gratitude and remembered the matchbook from earlier in the day. At that moment, I was ready to throw it on the ground. Now, I was glad I kept it near. "I've got a light," I said, rummaging in my pockets for said matchbook. I felt the light crinkle of paper, as well as the folded cardstock I was looking for, and pulled them both out. I nearly spat out my cig when I saw it. The rumpled order ticket from the butcher that I hadn't thrown out. 97. The stranger next to me huffed, having lit his own, and I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it before. In hindsight, his eyes alone should have given it away. A man with literal galaxies in his eyes. Look for the stars? Who are you? I asked. I didn't even care to strike the match anymore. I knew the answer to my question already. A waft of a familiar sulfuric odor entered my nostrils. Faintly, I realized it was growing on me. Eliana's ghastly visage appeared upside down next to the stranger, but instead of terror, he turned to face her with resignation. You again, loud girl, he sighed. What have you done now? He stared directly at her face when he talked to her. The lack of anything seemed not to bother him. Eliana, who fully appeared sitting on the stranger's shoulders, grasped his hands with her own, next to the bulky man dressed like a steampunk engineer. Eliana was small, thin, and frail. Her white dress was slightly sheer in the light of the sunset. Minus the abject horror of her body, I thought she looked quite pretty. For once, I wasn't deathly afraid of her. This was a side of Eliana that I had never seen before. Sure, maybe she wasn't an angel. Maybe she was a demon. But she was here now, and it didn't seem like we would be separating anytime soon. I resolved to figure out her origins, and my first lead was the hulk of a man she chattered with now. All right, girl. We'll meet at the rendezvous in 3 days. Yes, the one up north. Be safe and don't go in between. Eliana chirped once. In a single swift motion, she jumped from the stranger to me and grabbed my face tightly in her hands. Looking up at her now, I felt less of the uneasiness that accompanied viewing her. Do not die. He will explain. He has seen the stars. She disappeared again, leaving not a single trace. Hopefully she was right and the stranger would finally tell me what was going on. She does that, the man said, followed by a gruff cough. I'll explain on the way up. You got a car? No, I'm from out of state. Are you him? Are you the astronomer? I couldn't keep the questions from escaping now, and I was surprised I had managed to wait this long in the first place. You'll finally tell me what's going on? He sighed and pulled another cigarette from his pocket pack. At least you got one thing right. She really told you Jack, huh, kid? Like I said, I'll tell you on the way. Right now, we're going to Sacramento. Sacramento? Sacramento, he affirmed, breathing out a plume of smoke. Now, unless you've got a car, we have to figure out a way up there stat. Them's gonna be coming, especially after that mess in there. I realized then that I didn't have any options. I had been sucked into a journey that started with questions I didn't have the answer to, and yet, this man seemed to have them. I knew what to do then. Like I said, I don't have a car, I repeated. But what about a train? He raised an eyebrow in intrigue. You don't know what you just said. Train's out of the question. But I already have a ticket booked for Napa for work, and it leaves tomorrow morning. He let out a cloud of smoke right in my face. You're asking for it, kid. I should have listened to him about the train. To be fair, he didn't give me much detail either. The starry-eyed stranger, no, the astronomer, and I were now waiting to enter Union Station. True to her word, Eliana was nowhere to be seen, which left the two of us standing around, waiting to go inside. There was just an overwhelming presence that was stopping us. A foreboding warning, a sign that this was sure to be a hell of a trip. I'm sure the astronomer picked it up too, but I'm afraid to say it out loud. I think they'd hear me. But the windows of the station aren't just windows. They're eyes. And they've been watching us since we got here. And we still have an hour until our train.